Braxcast time once again, and this is the 28th episode of this podcast, and we've got a good bit of stuff to talk about, so I want to get right into it. I don't want to bury the lead with anything. I want to start off with this. So this isn't necessarily Rippaverse related. This is the Rippasend, which is the, I guess, creator-owned publishing arm of the Rippaverse, operating as a highly specialized 3PL for independent comics. I talked about it when it was first revealed very early on in the Braxcast, and very soon after Rippasend was revealed, Achromatic Chronicles Green, J3PO is the writer for that. I don't know the art team, but that was the first Rippasend book. Of course, you had the applications. There isn't a full storefront. None of the books, Achromatic Chronicles Green, hasn't come out yet, but what we do have is the announcement for the second Rippasend book, which is The Mighty Golden Patriot by Yellow Flash and John Dillard. John Dillard did a submission to the Isom fan art contest. I can't remember if it was one or two. It's a great submission. He's a fantastic artist, and it looks like he's going to be doing great work in this book, The Mighty Golden Patriot, which we knew about for a while. That Yellow Flash and John Dillard were working on this book together. We did see some art. This is the cover. We saw this art before, but not in its full cover form. But now we know it's being published through Rippasend, which is really interesting. So we know we've got two Rippasend books that are on the way, coming really soon. I imagine with that, you're going to see the launch of the Rippasend storefront, where you'll get campaigns from a bunch of independent people or stuff that's not meant to be evergreen, like the Rippaverse store. So it's really interesting seeing Rippasend become more and more legitimate. Of course, it's going to become an actual thing when you can actually go to Rippasend.com and buy A Mighty Golden Patriot, Achromatic Chronicles Green, and all the other books from creators that are sure to be working with Rippasend in the future. But I definitely wanted to mention that, as I think there is a good bit of overlap. But getting into Rippaverse related news, we've got Horseman. So Horseman is really hyped up because, we loved Alpha Core #1 on the same team, Chuck Dixon writing, Joe Bennett doing fantastic art. So it's going to be an absolute banger, and we now know it's coming out September. Confirmed. He said it's coming out next month, and that was set alongside a 19-second teaser trailer. You had Horseman in that appearance, basically just being like a warehouse environment, jump, and then it's like coming September. So it's really exciting, of course. Like, I just really want to get into Horseman, see that collection campaign, get all the interiors teased, and of course get the final book in our hands so I can review it, so we can know more about Flores Park. Again, the subtitle is Welcome to Flores Park, so there's going to be a lot of world building. I love the idea of a vigilante type character. That's very core to the concept of a hero. Of course, you've got Batman, and then of course Horseman doesn't have power here as Batman, but the idea of being a hero really comes with vigilantism, and we really haven't had that in a very strong character in the Rippaverse, as in, like, it hasn't been something that's been like the central theme of a character. And I really think Horseman is really going to be that. So of course, having a teaser trailer, knowing that it's on the way, is going to really close out the summer, going to really do it very nicely. And then we also know that Isom #3 has completed pencils and inks, and it's being colored now, not by Gabe El-Taib, because he is going and building big man comics. He had Dean Cain, All-American Lawman, that first book, and there's a bunch of other books that he is working on, so he is too busy to be the colorist for the final part of the Old Vice arc, which is a little bit disappointing, but I'm sure they'll get someone really good to finish off that arc, and it's really exciting to know that that book is coming soon, because the art for it is complete. It just needs to be colored and lettered and then edited, and then get the copies out and get it to the masses. So the other thing, I guess, we were talking about Isom 3 being completed. There was a special collection that was released this week, Isom #1 Signature Series. So Signature Series started with Isom #2. There were signed copies that were released with the original Isom #1 campaign, but those were not slabbed, so no Signature Series. I got those copies graded. It's green. It's like a lower grade than the Universal grade, and it's definitely not as good as the Signature Series, but they are rectifying that by going into the extra stock that they had for all of these very limited 800, 700, 800 and 700 for cover A and B of Isom #1, 550 for Isom cover C, and 175 of that concept art book, of which only 2,000 were printed. I think they sold maybe between like 17 and 1800 for the original campaign, sold a couple more for Rippaverse Day, and I imagine the rest of the stock has been signed and is going to be graded by CGC and it will get out to the customers. I got all these books, even though my wallet definitely had a lot of kicking and screaming into making that decision, but it's going to complete that signature series, and I imagine Isom Free will have signature series as well. That's a really collectible thing. Do we need to have signature series for every single book? No, but to have all 3 books of the ill-advised arc be signature series, I think makes sense. So hopefully Isom number 3 has a signature series for all the covers, just like it did with Isom number 2 and Yaira number 1, and of course Alpha Core as well. Being launched with, I think, a campaign is in order for Isom number 3 and Blood Roof, and I think everything else can be collections going forward. Like I said, getting into like that big event that I think is coming guaranteed after Isom number 3. But this is a really cool thing to do for the fans that do that. Like I said, a signature series for Isom number 1, and then hopefully do one for number 3, so that way the ill-advised arc can have that like really great collectability for people like myself who like to buy the books in the slabs. Of course, it's not everyone's cup of tea. It can be a bit expensive. There are people who think comic books shouldn't be collectibles at all, should only be read. But for those of us who want to collect comic books and want to collect them being slabbed, I think this is a really fantastic thing, and I'm glad that they decided to do it. But we're going to move on to the questions of the day, and I've got 2 here. Question of the day: are you hoping for a continuous series for Gooding? Now, I've reviewed Gooding the Polymath. I really liked it. I think it was definitely a little bit too short. It needed to be expanded upon. And I think making Gooding a 3-issue miniseries where you get Mike Baron to write 2 more books around that length that explain how Gooding goes from where he is in the end of his first book, Gooding the Polymath, to his appearance in Isom number 2 would be really interesting, because there is definitely this gap of time that I think the fans who really enjoy Gooding, and there definitely are fans who really enjoy Gooding and want more of that character, like we want to know, about that gap of time, especially if you're intrigued by the character of Gooding and you enjoyed Isom. You definitely know that there is a little bit of a difference between how he is at the end of Gooding the Polymath and how he is in his appearance in Isom number 2. And I think that's definitely something that's really justified expanding upon. Of course, you've got Splatterpuss, you've got Gina Adams, you've got his, I guess, employees at Gooding Services that he works with, the people who I'm sure he used to work with at Mindwire. So there's a lot of things that Mike Baron definitely could have dived a bit deeper on if he had written a bit of a longer script. Like a 20-page longer script than what the final story ended up being. And I think having Gooding be greenlit for a miniseries, a 3-issue miniseries, like I said, where you have 2 more books around that same length, will really allow it to like dive deep into that really interesting story of Gooding. And the concept is great. People really liked Gooding the Polymath for the most part. Of course, you have people who didn't like it, but but the way I see is that fans responded well enough to Gooding to justify it being a 3-issue miniseries. I'm definitely one of those fans. So that is what I want. I don't want to be a continuous series, because I don't think that's needed or justified. And I think if they get into making too many continuous series ongoing, I think having Isom, Alpha Core, Blood Roof, and Yaira have those 4 flagship ongoing series, and then having characters that are a bit more popular, are a bit more popular that fans respond well to, can leave the realm of being one-shots and be mini-series to start out with. And then if those mini-series do well, then you can make them ongoing series. So I think that's what the next step for like a character like Horseman would be, if we really love Horseman, not to greenlight him for an ongoing series instantly, but do like, a mini-series, right? 3, 4, 5, 6 issues. And if people respond to that really well, then it has to be an ongoing series. I think that's the litmus test. And I think that'll allow them to maintain a reasonable rate of growth, instead of committing to making like 12 or 20 or however many ongoing series, or making everything an ongoing series, right? But I think that's the way I would do things if I was in Eric's position as the editor-in-chief, is, we'll go from like Rippasend appearance to one-shot to mini-series to ongoing series. And then if you have response, that's well enough to get to that next topic, that's how you end up being an ongoing series in the Rippaverse. Of course, with the exception being these four, I think, flagship characters that are going to just have their own books, that being Isom, Yaira, Alpha Core, and Bloodroof. And I think through that, it'll give like a really great core of characters that are different and varied enough to give us a really interesting look at Flora Spark. And then, of course, like I said, you can expand upon that with one-shots and mini-series, and I think that'll really build a really interesting and intriguing comic book universe as we get more books under our belt. I think that's the way to do it, and I think that's the way I personally would want to do it. But we're going to move on to the last question of the day. Who would you like to see in a Rippaverse team-up series? So I think the most appealing one to me would be a Shadron and Santuan team-up, because they both have beef with Isom. Or at least, Santuan's got more beef with Isom than Shadron, but Shadron, I guess Shadron is just an indiscriminate killing machine, right? So he's going to want to kill everybody, but he's been in conflict with Isom before. I imagine he would like to finish the job. And of course, Santuan personally wants Isom gone because, his ego demands it. So I think, that and the fact that they're both these big physical bruiser type characters would be really interesting to see them to reckon up Flora Spark, and then Alpha Core and Isom have to work together in a very tenuous relationship, and I imagine it would be really, really fun. So you could have like a dual team up with being Shadron and Santuan, and then Isom and the Alpha Core. And I think you would have a really interesting story if something like that were to happen. So that's the one that really sticks in my mind the most. You could also have like a Yaira and a Bloodroof, because people really like those two characters, but I think Bloodroof is a bit more, I don't know, of a lone wolf type. I think she doesn't really like venturing out and collaborating with too many people. I think it would be a bit of a weird thing. But I think the more likely thing we're going to see with Yaira teaming up with anybody is going to be Altona. And I think if you've read Yaira #1, that I think that's the natural progression of the story points that were set up in Yaira #1 by the Saska sisters, and I think it's going to end with a tenuous, but in the end, an alliance between Altona and Yaira. With her antics as Yaira and her antics and her career as Dr. Sally Rodell. I think Altona will have a hand in making sure both of those go well, and I think it's going to be a really interesting part of the Yaira story, which is one of the reasons why Yaira #2 is going to be a book that I'm anticipating, right? But I think, that's the biggest team up. That's the one that comes into my mind. Santuan and Shadron collaborating would be really fun. And then I guess it's just popped in my head, if I was going to think of Bloodroof collaborating with anybody, it would be Dokuman, because they can both travel through realms. So I think them meeting each other while they're traveling through realms, Bloodroof doing whatever she's doing, I think, getting like the walls, the dragons, those sort of creatures to be part of her side, or, other artifacts and things of note that would make her more powerful in other realms. I think while she's traveling and doing that, and while Dokuman is expanding his archives, not only in the realm that Earth exists, but in the realm where in the other realms, they would, meet, and then they would have, a really interesting story that spawns because of that. So I think a Bloodroof and a Dokuman team-up book would be nice, but like I said, Shadron and Santuan, because I think you could couple that with an Alpha Core and Isom team up, because you have Santuan and Shadron terrorize Flora Spark. The Alpha Core responds, and then they're looking for Avery, who's in Flora Spark, because he returns to being Isom, right? I think that would be a really interesting thing, and I think that would be a really fantastic thing to do as an event. And you could really, wreak some havoc with Flora Spark. You can get Horseman involved, you get Bloodroof involved, because, those characters are just so big and powerful that, especially if they work together and they decide to just wreak havoc, you could just have it be such a notable event that all the characters, or most of the characters that we've been introduced to so far in the Rippaverse, have to get involved in order to resolve that issue. But with that, I'm going to end it here. I did want to mention that the Rippasend 2 collection, and Rippasend 2 collection being over $150,000 as the time I'm recording this, and the Isom 1 signature series is around $120,000. It got to like $100,000 in like a day or so. So the fans are really responding well to all of the collections. I always just like to basically just mention that, and then you're like hyped up and say that we have a really fantastic audience that is responding well to the sandbox that the Rippaverse is making. And that's why I like to mention the numbers, at least, a little bit. But I think it's really fantastic to see that you've got the strong fan base and you've got the strong company that's really invested in fostering that, like I said, sandbox for the fans to play around it. But with that, it's been the Braxcast. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one, and Joker is out.
Thank you for tuning in to the Braxcast. Be sure to like, comment, follow, and subscribe to keep up with the Rippaverse.